After 3 years of marriage, the first time I ever saw Adrian Whitmore at a formal business event, he was dressed in a flawless suit with the hottest financial news anchor in the country on his arm. He walked right past me, his gaze as cool and indifferent as if I were a stranger. A coworker whispered behind me, "Isn't that Mr. Whitmore's new girlfriend?" I heard they're practically engaged. I lowered my head and adjusted the simultaneous interpreting equipment. My fingertips had gone cold. In 3 years of marriage, Adrian had never acknowledged my existence in public. Today, as the executive sitting on the opposite side of the negotiating table, he was about to hear my voice in a professional setting for the first time. In 8 languages. 5 minutes before the negotiations began, I stood inside a stall in the women's restroom and stared at the locked door for a long time. When I finally stepped out, the mirror reflected a plain, tired face. My features were soft, and years of late nights had left my skin pale. My black business suit was conservative and inexpensive, my hair pinned into a neat twist. The only jewelry I wore was a small pair of pearl studs. Adrian's mother had given them to me at the wedding. They were the only kindness I had ever received from anyone in the Whitmore family. Sharp heels clicked across the marble outside, followed by a woman's bright, playful voice. "Adrian, which interpreting company did you hire this time? Please don't tell me it's another bargain basement team like the last one. I can't watch someone embarrass you again." My chest tightened. I knew that voice. Vanessa Lane was the country's most popular financial news anchor. For the past 3 months, she had appeared beside Adrian at galas, charity dinners, airport lounges, and private events. Entertainment sites were filled with photographs of them under headlines like, "Whitmore CEO's new romance?" "Mystery anchor seen entering his estate." "Meridian Language Services," Adrian replied. His voice was low and brief, exactly the way it sounded at home when he spoke to me. "Oh, they're good." Vanessa gave a light laugh. "I heard they have one interpreter who's incredible. Apparently she can work in 8 languages. One syllable. No praise. No surprise. No, that interpreter is my wife." Not even the smallest shift in his tone. I lowered my eyes to the hand gripping the edge of the sink. My knuckles had turned white. 3 years earlier, when I married Adrian, I was 23 and fresh out of graduate school at the Briarwood Institute of Languages and Diplomacy. I held certifications in 8 foreign languages and was considered one of the most promising young simultaneous interpreters in the country. My advisor said I was the most gifted student she had taught in 20 years. One of the nation's leading language firms had offered me a position a full year before graduation. I had thought my life was about to begin. Then my father took my hand from his hospital bed and used his last breath to make the request that changed everything. "Claire, the Whitmores saved our family once. They need a daughter-in-law. Please do this for me. Let our family repay what we owe." The Whitmores wanted a quiet, obedient wife for Adrian, not an ambitious interpreter with a public career. Before the wedding, Margaret Whitmore had made her expectations clear. A Whitmore wife doesn't need to chase a career or put herself on display. Resign from the agency. Learn to manage a home and support your husband. So I resigned. I went from being a rising interpreter who could move effortlessly among 8 languages to an invisible woman whose days revolved around grocery lists, meal plans, and a stove. For 3 years, more than 1,000 days and nights, I buried grammar systems, diplomatic terminology, financial vocabulary, and interpreting drills at the bottom of my mind, along with my name. My past. And every bright part of myself. To the public, Adrian Whitmore was single. Inside the family estate, I was Miss Bennett, the woman who occupied the bedroom at the far end of the 2nd floor. Even the household staff felt free to ignore me. I drew in a slow breath and opened the stall door. Vanessa stood in front of the mirror touching up her lipstick. She noticed me in the reflection and looked me over from head to toe. When she saw the interpreter's badge and receiver hanging from my neck, one eyebrow lifted. "You're one of the interpreters?" she asked, her tone carrying the casual superiority of someone inspecting hired help. "Yes." I walked to the sink and turned on the water. "Then do a good job. Don't make mistakes." She capped her lipstick and pressed her lips together. Negotiations at this level aren't something just anyone can handle. I said nothing. I washed my hands carefully, then dried them with a paper towel. Apparently bored by my lack of reaction, Vanessa headed toward the door. Just before leaving, she glanced back and studied my face for 2 seconds, then she smiled as though she had solved a private puzzle. "You know, you look a little like someone." The door closed behind her, the restroom fell silent again. I stared at myself in the mirror and suddenly understood what she meant. I looked like the Claire Bennett from 3 years ago, the young woman who had once strode into an interpreting booth in high heels and commanded a room with flawless pronunciation. The graduate student who had spoken at a Model United Nations conference and received the highest score in the competition's history, the winner of an international interpreting championship, whom reporters had called a language prodigy. Not the woman standing in a luxury hotel restroom while her husband's rumored girlfriend treated her like background staff. My phone vibrated with a message from the project group chat. I wiped away the moisture gathering at the corner of my eye and walked out. The negotiation hall occupied the entire 16th floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel. Floral displays lined both sides of the corridor, each congratulating Whitmore Holdings and Germany's Klein Global on their proposed strategic partnership. I crossed the hallway and joined my team in the preparation room. "Claire, your lead on German today. You're good with that, right?" Mark Lawson, the project manager, handed me a thick stack of documents. "You've reviewed everything? We have representatives from 8 countries. There'll be German, French, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Spanish, and Portuguese. You're our ace, so the complicated sections are yours." I took the documents and nodded. "No problem." "Great." Mark patted my shoulder and lowered his voice. "Whitmore Holdings is the client, and they're demanding. Adrian Whitmore himself will be present for the entire session. Do well today and I'll double your year-end performance bonus." Adrian Whitmore himself. My fingers tightened around the papers until my nails pressed into the fibers. For 3 years, I had made dinner and waited for him to come home. I waited until the food went cold. I waited until 1 or 2 in the morning. Most nights he arrived smelling of liquor, opened the bedroom door, and collapsed without speaking. He wore the shirts I ironed to galas where different women stood beside him. Their photographs appeared across the internet. Everyone knew the young head of Whitmore Holdings was wealthy, brilliant, and constantly surrounded by beautiful women. No one knew he had been married for 3 years. Our marriage certificate was locked in the cedar chest my parents had given me, beside the wedding ring Adrian had never worn. "Is everyone ready? We start in 10 minutes, a conference assistant called from the doorway. I inhaled deeply and pushed every stray thought aside. The interpreting booth was my battlefield, whatever happened outside it. Once I put on the headset and touched the microphone, I became Claire Bennett again. The doors to the negotiation hall opened, and delegates began filing in. I was the last interpreter to enter the soundproof booth. Through the glass, I watched Adrian walk into the room surrounded by executives and legal counsel. He wore a custom charcoal suit. He was tall, straight-backed, and sharply handsome, with an expression that warned people not to approach without a reason. Vanessa's arm was linked through his. Her champagne-colored gown made her look luminous under the ballroom lights. They passed less than 10 feet from me. Adrian's gaze swept across the interpreting booths. It paused on my face for less than a second, then moved on. It was the look a man might give a piece of conference equipment. My heartbeat sounded heavy inside my chest. Once, twice, the audio engineer's voice came through my headset. I adjusted the microphone, opened my reference binder, and focused on the first page. The opening speaker was a representative from Klein Global. His German carried a thick Bavarian accent. I activated my microphone. English flowed from my mouth with precision and ease. The German vocabulary that had lain dormant for 3 years broke loose like water through a collapsed dam, transforming instantly into clear, polished business English. Outside the booth, Adrian lifted his head. Through the soundproof glass, I felt his eyes turn toward me. I didn't look back. I concentrated on the voice in my headset and the terminology list in front of me. German had been my first foreign language. I had studied it for 7 years under a professor from the University of Bonn. Every consonant, cadence, and regional variation was familiar to me. The German presentation ended. A French delegate asked a question. Without pausing, I switched languages. Then came Japanese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese. When the final delegate finished speaking, The entire room was silent for 3 full seconds. 8 languages. No replacement interpreter. No interruption. Every segment accurate, smooth, and tonally precise. It was the kind of performance that appeared in professional training manuals. Adrian turned fully toward the booth. His expression remained controlled, but something unreadable had entered his eyes. He had finally recognized me. Not as the wife who waited at home. As Claire Bennett, the woman the interpreting world had once called a prodigy. I lowered my eyes and muted the microphone. Mark's excited voice burst through the internal channel. Claire, that was perfect. Your Arabic segment was unbelievable. The Klein team is nodding, they love you. I didn't answer. I looked through the glass. Vanessa's expression had changed. Her arm tightened around Adrian's, her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes fixed on the booth. Adrian still looked composed, but his eyes no longer looked the way they had during every silent night of our marriage. The meeting broke for 20 minutes. I removed my headset and left the booth to get water. The door opened, and I nearly walked into someone. Adrian stood directly outside holding a cup of coffee. It was the first time in 3 years that he had approached me voluntarily. Claire. He spoke my name in a low voice, giving nothing away. I stopped and looked up at him. In 3 years of marriage, I had never met his gaze as directly as I did then. My reflection appeared small and blurred in his dark eyes. Mr. Whitmore, I said evenly. Please excuse me. His brows drew together. He seemed about to speak, but instead he stepped aside. I walked past with my empty cup, my spine straight and my pace unhurried. 3 steps later, Vanessa's sweet voice floated down the hallway. Adrian, what are you doing here? I've been looking everywhere for you. I didn't turn around. Back inside the booth, I put on my headset and sealed the rest of the world outside. The second half of the negotiations would focus on Whitmore Holdings and a Japanese investment consortium. I opened my Japanese terminology guide and studied the first line. The booth door opened without warning. Adrian stood there holding his phone. On the screen was our wedding photograph from 3 years ago. I wore a white gown. He stood beside me with an unreadable face. My mother called, he said. A trace of fatigue threaded through his voice. She wants us at the family house for dinner tonight. I looked at the photograph and almost laughed at the irony. Margaret Whitmore had never once invited us to dinner without a reason. She had opposed the marriage from the beginning and accepted it only because of Arthur Whitmore's final wish and the promise between our families. Now, of all days, she wanted us home. All right, I said, as if the matter had nothing to do with me. Adrian remained in the doorway. His gaze settled on the material spread across my desk, dense terminology lists, handwritten notes in several languages, color-coded annotations. I had prepared them over 3 sleepless nights. You. He paused. You did well today. It was the first compliment he had given me in 3 years. I looked up and smiled faintly. Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I'm simply doing my job. Vanessa called his name from the hall. Adrian turned and left. When the door closed, my heartbeat finally lost its rhythm. The signal for the next session sounded in my headset. I wrapped my hand around the microphone again. Outside, summer sunlight burned across Ravenport. The glass towers reflected it in blinding sheets. I sat in a booth barely large enough for one person and commanded a room in 8 languages. Yet when I faced my own husband, I could barely form a complete sentence. 3 years ago, I had put on a wedding dress for him. Now I was the finest interpreter at his negotiating table, and between us lay the distance of an entire world. Before the session resumed, I picked up my phone and sent a message to a number I had not contacted in 3 years. Daniel, I need legal advice about a divorce. The moment I pressed send, I closed my eyes. Outside the booth, Adrian sat at the head of the table, his long fingers turning the first page of the contract, his profile sharp and cold. He had no idea that the wife who had lived invisibly in his house for 3 years had finally decided to stop being silent. The message I sent Daniel Mercer was like a stone dropped into stagnant water. My screen went dark, then lit up again. His reply contained one word. Okay. Daniel had been a year ahead of me in graduate school and one of the brightest students the institute had ever produced. Then, immediately after graduation, he abandoned interpreting and went to law school. Everyone thought he had lost his mind. I was one of the few people who knew why. His father had lost a major international lawsuit because a translator mistranslated a critical contractual term. The family's company collapsed under the judgment. After that, Daniel put away his interpreter's headset and picked up legal briefs. He once told me, if language can't protect the people you love, then knowing a dozen languages is just decoration. Within a few years, he had become a respected family law attorney. During my 3 years in the Whitmore household, I had contacted him only once. It was my first wedding anniversary. I had cooked an elaborate dinner and waited until 3 in the morning. Adrian finally came home carrying the scent of a perfume I didn't own, walked upstairs, and fell asleep without looking at the table. I sat alone in the dark and texted Daniel. Is marriage always like this? He replied, no. We hadn't spoken since until today. The afternoon session was harder than the morning session. The lead representative from the Japanese Investment Consortium was an old-school businessman in his 50s who treated every sentence as a negotiation inside the negotiation. He examined every clause word by word. As I interpreted, I marked the source documents at high speed, identifying hidden conditions, strategic ambiguities, and carefully softened objections. I rendered them into English with language precise enough to preserve both meaning and intent. Outside the booth, Adrian negotiated with the Japanese delegation. His conversational Japanese was strong, but detailed legal and financial language required a specialist. It was the first time I had watched him work from only a few yards away. He was focused, calm, and nearly impossible to unsettle, a blade wrapped in velvet. Over the past 3 years, I had assembled my understanding of Adrian from financial news, magazine covers, and the documents he sometimes left in the study. He was the youngest business legend in the city. At 27, he had taken control of his family's company. In 3 years, he tripled its valuation. Competitors called him ruthless, decisive, and impossible to read, but he had never let me see this side of him. In his world, I was supposed to simmer soup in the kitchen, arrange flowers in the living room, and become invisible whenever he required an uncomplicated wife in the background. The negotiations ended at 4 in the afternoon with a preliminary agreement. The Japanese representative stood and shook Adrian's hand, offering a final courtesy in Japanese. Before I could interpret, Adrian answered him fluently. Then his gaze moved across the room and met mine. Something flickered there and disappeared before I could name it. As the delegates left, Mark hurried over, flushed with excitement. Claire, do you know what the client said about you? They called you the best simultaneous interpreter they've heard in 5 years. Whitmore Holdings General Counsel personally asked for your contact information. They want you for every international negotiation going forward. I smiled, but before I could respond, heels clicked behind me. Adrian, where are we having the celebration dinner? I already booked a private room, Vanessa said, slipping her hand around his arm. Adrian didn't answer her. He looked at me. Mark took the hint and quietly moved away. We're going to the family house tonight, Adrian said. His tone was flat, as though the decision had already been made. Vanessa's smile froze for a fraction of a second, then returned. Then I'll come with you. No. Adrian removed his arm from hers. My driver will take you home. His voice wasn't loud, but the distance in it was more cutting than anger. Color rose and fell in Vanessa's face. She said nothing. When she turned to leave, she sent me a look sharp enough to draw blood. I had no intention of standing in the middle of their performance. I gathered my papers and headed for the exit. I'll wait for you in the underground garage, Adrian said behind me. I paused, but didn't turn around. His black Maybach was parked in the private space at the far end of the garage. The vanity plate read AW001. I opened the passenger door and sat down with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. In truth, I had done it many times. Whenever we visited the family estate, Adrian drove and I sat in this seat. In 3 years, we had barely held a real conversation during those drives. The car left the garage and merged into rush hour traffic. A slow English song played through the speakers. Neon lights crossed the window like a moving river of stars. How long did you prepare for today's negotiations? Adrian asked suddenly. 3 days. You couldn't have learned all those specialized terms in 3 days. I didn't deny it. Although I hadn't worked a professional booth in 3 years, I had never stopped training. Every morning at 4, I spent 2 hours in the study translating international news, market reports, legal analysis, and academic papers in every language I knew. That wasn't preparation for a single job. It was my only way to breathe. "Why did you take this assignment?" he asked. I turned and studied his profile under the passing streetlights. "Because I need money." It was the truth. During our 3-year marriage, the Whitmore family had never given me a personal allowance. Every purchase I made came from my own savings. The money had originally been set aside for an overseas fellowship, about $40,000. After 3 years of living expenses and last month's professional certification renewal, I had less than $500 left. Adrian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The car was silent for a long time. "You could have asked me," he said. I gave a small laugh and looked back out the window. The Maybach turned through the gates of the Whitmore estate. The main house was a historic Georgian mansion set behind old trees and formal gardens. Adrian's grandfather had been among Ravenport's first major industrialists. 3 generations had built the family's influence. Margaret Whitmore was already waiting in the sitting room. At 55, she looked a decade younger. She wore a dark emerald silk dress and a flawless jade-colored bangle that caught the light when she moved. "You're back." Her gaze moved over my plain black suit, and her brows tightened almost imperceptibly. "Claire, go change before dinner." "There's no need," Adrian said before I could answer. "We're leaving when we finish eating." Margaret looked at her son and let the matter drop. Dinner was suffocating. 4 entrees and a soup had been prepared, all of them Adrian's favorites. Margaret filled his plate while discussing company business, relatives, and the daughter of some prominent family who had just completed a finance degree at Cambridge. Not one sentence directly concerned me. Every sentence was about me. "By the way," Margaret said, setting down her fork and dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, "the Harrington girl returns next month. She studied finance at Cambridge, and you two used to play together when you were children. You should have dinner with her." Adrian didn't respond. He placed a piece of fish on his plate. At last, Margaret turned to me. "Claire, I heard you worked as an interpreter for Adrian's company today." "I did." A Whitmore wife working publicly as hired staff doesn't reflect well on the family. Her tone was mild, but each word struck bone. "If you need spending money, ask us. Don't go outside and humiliate yourself." I placed my fork on the table and lifted my head. I had endured too much in 3 years. I had endured her criticism of every meal I cooked. I had watched her throw away birthday gifts I bought with my own money. At family gatherings, she introduced me only as Claire Bennett, never as her daughter-in-law. I endured it because of my father's final request, because I kept hoping that, somehow, this family might eventually make room for me. But inside the interpreting booth that morning, when I touched a microphone again, I understood something with perfect clarity. The debt of gratitude was not supposed to be repaid with a person's dignity. "Margaret," I said, my voice steady, "there is nothing humiliating about being an interpreter." Her eyes turned cold. "What did you say?" "I said my work is not shameful. Speaking 8 languages is a skill, not a disgrace. The Whitmore family may refuse to recognize me as Adrian's wife, but you don't get to dismiss my profession." The dining room went so quiet I could hear the clock in the hall. Adrian lowered his fork and looked at me with an unreadable expression. "Do you understand who you're speaking to?" Margaret asked. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from rage held too tightly. "Yes." I stood and picked up my purse. "I've eaten at this table for 3 years. That's enough. From now on, I'll earn my own living." As I turned away, a hand closed around my wrist. Adrian's fingers pressed against the bone hard enough to hurt. "Sit down," he said. I didn't move. I said sit down. He pulled me back toward the chair. Margaret watched us with icy satisfaction and let out a humorless laugh. "Adrian, look at the wife you married. Your grandfather insisted the Bennetts had saved our family and forced you into this match. I told him from the beginning that marriages between people from different worlds always end badly." My hand tightened beneath the table. I had spent years refusing to examine the truth of our marriage too closely. When Arthur Whitmore was a young man, he had suffered a ruptured appendix while working at a remote manufacturing site. My grandfather carried him for miles to the nearest rural clinic and saved his life. When the Whitmores later became wealthy, Arthur never forgot the debt. His final wish was that the two families be joined through marriage. Adrian married me not because he loved me, not even because he wanted me. He married me because a dying man had asked him to. Mother, Adrian said suddenly. Exhaustion edged his voice. That's enough. Margaret fell silent, but the look she gave me grew colder. Dinner ended badly. When we stepped outside, a thin rain had begun to fall. It shimmered in the estate's lamps and softened the trees along the driveway. I walked ahead. Adrian followed at an even pace. Claire. I stopped. Rain touched my face, cold and fine. You did this deliberately today, he said. I didn't turn around. He was right. When Mark first offered me the assignment, I saw Whitmore Holdings listed as the client. I hesitated for 3 seconds, then signed the contract. Those 3 seconds were the last hesitation I would give this marriage. I want a divorce, I said. The rain made every word sound startlingly clear. Adrian was silent for a long time. Then, so quietly that the rain nearly swallowed it, he said, I won't sign the settlement. When Adrian said, I won't sign the settlement, his voice was quiet, yet the words drove into the softest part of my heart like a nail. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't an explanation. It wasn't even a discussion. It was a declaration, delivered as though his decision automatically became reality. I said nothing more. I opened the car door and got in. Rainwater slid from my hair onto the leather seat, leaving dark, spreading marks. Adrian entered from the driver's side. The engine started, and warm air flowed through the vents, carrying the scent of leather and cedar. We left the tree-lined road outside the estate and entered the city's stream of headlights. The notification appeared on the dashboard display. I caught Vanessa's name in the corner of my vision. It was a voice message automatically converted to text. Only the first line was visible. Adrian, text me when you get home. A second notification pushed the rest away. Adrian didn't look at the screen. One hand remained on the steering wheel, his jaw set tightly. He drove the way he negotiated, controlled, restrained, leaving no opening. I had once believed that was only how he handled business. Eventually I understood that he handled marriage the same way, like a transaction that required order but no emotion. The car stopped outside the villa. Adrian turned off the engine but didn't get out. The windshield wipers fell still, and rain blurred the streetlights beyond the glass. Why did you really take the assignment? He asked again. This time, I didn't hide behind the answer about money. Because I needed to find out something. I unfastened my seatbelt and turned toward him. I needed to know whether I could still be myself. The day I resigned 3 years earlier, I locked my professional certificates inside the cedar chest along with the navy suit I had spent an entire month's salary having tailored. Margaret had stood in front of me and said, "A Whitmore wife doesn't need a career." Adrian stood beside her and said nothing. He didn't say, "She has the right to choose." He didn't say, "I'll support whatever she decides." He simply remained silent, exactly as he had when he first saw me in the booth today. That silence hurt more than a direct refusal ever could. I opened the door and stepped into the rain. Cold water ran down the back of my neck and made me shiver. In my room, I opened the cedar chest and took out the tailored navy suit. The smell of cedar had faded, but the fabric remained crisp. I hung it in the most visible place in my closet. Then I pulled our marriage certificate from the bottom of the chest. The folder had begun to fade. In the photograph, we looked like two strangers forced into the same frame. I wore a white dress and an uncertain smile. Adrian wore a black suit and no expression. The clerk had said, "Move a little closer." Neither of us had moved. I closed the folder and placed it in the inner compartment of my shoulder. Bag.my phone rang. "Daniel. We should meet," he said. His voice retained the calm warmth I remembered. "A divorce like this is too complicated to discuss by phone." We agreed on 2 o'clock the next afternoon at a coffee shop below his law office. I arrived 30 minutes early, ordered an Americano, and chose a table by the window. Soft jazz played overhead. Pedestrians moved past the glass in both directions. I opened my phone and saw the day's entertainment headline. Whitmore CEO returns home late at night with mystery woman, secret cohabitation. The photograph showed Adrian's car entering the villa's underground garage. A woman's profile was visible in the passenger seat. That woman was me, but no one knew. As far as the public was concerned, Adrian Whitmore was single, the city's most valuable bachelor. Any woman beside him could become the future Mrs. Whitmore. The media preferred to guess that the mystery woman was a rising actress, an heiress, or another television personality, not his wife of 3 years. I dismissed the article as Daniel entered the cafe. He had changed very little. He still wore thin gold-rimmed glasses. His pale gray shirt sleeves were rolled to his forearms, exposing skin darkened by the sun. He sat across from me without small talk and removed a document from his briefcase. "Draft divorce settlement," he said. "This is the basic version. Read it and tell me what you want changed." I turned the pages slowly. The property section was almost blank. We had never signed a prenuptial agreement, but none of the Whitmore assets had ever become part of my life. The villa belonged to Adrian. The car belonged to Adrian. Even the wedding ring on my hand had been purchased by the family. The only things that truly belonged to Claire Bennett were the cedar chest and the certificates inside it. "I don't want any of the property," I said. "I want to leave with what I brought." Daniel's pen paused. Something moved behind his glasses, but he didn't question me immediately. A family law attorney saw people destroy each other over money every day. A wife asking for nothing must have seemed almost unnatural. "Are you sure?" he asked at last. "Yes." "All right." He drew a line through the property demands section and moved his pen down the page. "Any special terms?" I was silent for a moment. "Yes. I want him to sign voluntarily." Daniel set down the pen and leaned back. "He refuses?" "Yes." "Did he say why?" I looked into the coffee, now completely cold, and shook my head. Adrian hadn't explained, and I no longer wanted to guess. Perhaps he was protecting his grandfather's final wish. Perhaps Margaret thought a divorce would embarrass the family. Perhaps Adrian simply liked having a legal wife hidden at home to discourage the endless stream of women who wanted him. Whatever the reason, it had nothing to do with me as a person. Daniel didn't press. Instead, he gathered the pages and changed the subject. "Are you going to keep interpreting?" "Yes." "Good." He smiled, faint lines appearing at the corners of his eyes. "When you gave up the United Nations Fellowship, your advisor threw a coffee mug at the wall. She said you were the most talented student she'd ever taught and the one most determined to ruin her own future." I looked down at my hands. The UN Fellowship had been awarded during my final year. Only 2 candidates had been selected nationwide. I had prepared for a full year, passed one examination and interview after another, and cried with joy when the offer arrived. Then my father became critically ill. Then the Whitmores proposed the marriage. Then every road in my life turned away from where I had intended to go. That was a long time ago. I finished the cold coffee in one swallow. Bitterness spread from my tongue to my throat. After leaving Daniel, I went to Meridian Language Services. Mark saw me and hurried over, grinning, with a thick payment envelope in his hand. "Claire, perfect timing. The client paid the invoice, and this is your project commission plus a special performance bonus." He pushed it into my hands. "Whitmore Holdings called personally to praise you. They want you assigned as lead interpreter for all future international negotiations. Do you know what that means? You can triple your normal rate." I felt the weight of the money inside the envelope. It was the first money I had earned in 3 years, not charity from the Whitmores, not repayment for my father's dying wish, money earned by my own ability. I placed it in my bag and smiled at Mark. "Thank you. Send me whatever work you have. If I'm qualified and available, I'll take it." He stared at me, then slapped his thigh in delight. "You're finally accepting more assignments? I thought Meridian was too small for you. We've been trying to get you back for years." I didn't explain. I had refused because the Whitmores wouldn't allow it. Now I accepted because I was finished asking their permission. By the time I left the office, evening had settled over the city. I took a cab home and saw the lights glowing through the villa windows from half a block away. A sense of unease moved through me. The moment I opened the front door, it was confirmed. The pair of red high heels stood in the foyer. They weren't mine. The size was smaller, the heels thinner than anything I owned. A woman's bright laughter drifted from the living room, intertwined with Adrian's low voice. I changed into house shoes and walked in. Vanessa sat on the sofa. 2 glasses of red wine and several plates of delicate pastries stood on the coffee table. She had changed into silk pajamas, not her pajamas, mine. The pale ivory set had been folded in the guest room closet. Adrian sat across from her in an armchair, holding a wineglass. His tie hung loose at his collar. When Vanessa saw me, her smile widened instead of fading. "Well, the interpreter is home." She raised her glass in a lazy toast. "You worked hard today. Sit down." She sounded as though she owned the house. I looked at Adrian. He didn't meet my eyes. He watched the wine circle the inside of his glass. "Why is she here?" I asked. "I asked Adrian to let me stop by," Vanessa answered before he could speak. Challenge sharpened every word. "Yesterday's negotiations were exhausting, and I wanted to thank him." "Is that a problem for you, Miss Interpreter?" I recognized the pajamas. I had bought them for myself on my birthday the year before. Real silk, pearl white, far more expensive than anything I usually purchased. I had tried them on once and then stored them in the guest room. Adrian never slept in the primary bedroom. I had thought that if he came home drunk and used the guest room one night, there should at least be something comfortable available. The first person to wear them was Vanessa Lane. I crossed the room and picked up the untouched glass of wine. Tea must have been poured for me. Though I rarely drank, I held it to the light, examined the color, and slowly tilted the glass. Dark red wine spread across the coffee table and soaked into a document Vanessa had left beside the pastries. She shot to her feet. "What is wrong with you?" "Those pajamas belong to me," I said with the calm tone of a weather report. "Ask before wearing someone else's clothes." I placed the empty glass on the table and turned toward the stairs. "Adrian!" Vanessa cried behind me. "You're going to let her behave like this? She's nothing but the interpreter your family hired. Stop." Adrian's voice was finally heard. It was cold enough to cut through the room. Silence followed. My hand rested on the banister, but I kept climbing. "Claire," Adrian called. I didn't turn. "She came to pick up a document," he said. I stopped on the third stair and looked down at them. One was my husband in the eyes of the law, the other was a stranger wearing my pajamas. They sat beneath the warm crystal chandelier like the owners of a comfortable home. I was the intruder. "Adrian," I said softly, "you don't need to explain. We have never required explanations from each other." Something shifted in his eyes, a narrow crack across frozen water, and vanished just as quickly. I went to my room and locked the door. An old dictionary lay on my nightstand, its cover worn from college. I opened it and found a yellowed note tucked between the pages. My advisor had written a German sentence in fountain pen on my first day of school. Sprache ist der Schlüssel zur Welt. Language is the key to the world. I taped the note above the nightstand and messaged Mark. "From now on, send me every assignment you can. The more demanding, the better." Then I opened my laptop and began organizing new project files. My phone lit up with Mark's reply. "Fantastic. There's a major international summit next month. 8-country delegation. I'm putting your name forward." Another message followed. "One issue, the organizers publish the interpreter roster in advance. Your full name will appear in the official program. Are you sure that's okay?" I typed 2 words. "I'm sure." When I pressed send, I knew I had stepped completely out of the shell that had hidden me. From now on, Claire Bennett was no longer the nameless woman in the bedroom at the far end of the Whitmore villa. She was an interpreter. Outside, the lights of the city turned the sky a soft orange. The villa was large enough for Adrian and me to live under one roof without seeing each other, but Ravenport was small enough that, beginning tomorrow, more and more people would know my name. "Adrian Whitmore, you refuse to sign, then I'll rebuild my life so completely that eventually you will have no choice but to let me go." The official program for the International Trade and Investment Summit arrived while I was eating a boxed lunch in Meridian's break room. Mark rushed in and slapped the glossy booklet onto the table. The coated cover reflected the fluorescent lights in a hard white glare. "Look at page 37. Lead interpreting team." He flipped it open and tapped my name. Claire Bennett. Working languages: English, German, French, Japanese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Spanish, and Portuguese. 8 foreign languages. There isn't another interpreter in the country with your range and booth experience. I finished chewing and looked at the printed name. IT appeared in ordinary black type beside 5 other lead interpreters. No special design. No dramatic introduction, but after the summit, thousands of copies would be distributed to delegates, executives, government officials, and members of the press. Every senior executive at Whitmore Holdings would see it. This summit is a major event, Mark said, lowering his voice even though no one else was near us. Excitement brightened his face. The Department of Commerce and the State Department are both involved. Foreign ministers, trade representatives, and corporate leaders are attending. If you establish yourself on this stage, every top agency in the country will try to recruit you. Your rate could increase tenfold. I set down my fork and turned through the schedule. The sessions ran from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, with only an hour for lunch. I had 1 month to build technical terminology banks for every delegation. The preparation would be at least 3 times more demanding than the Whitmore negotiation. When will we receive the complete briefing materials? I asked. Next week. I brought part of the delegate list so you can start your research early. Mark removed a stack of printed pages from his briefcase, then he hesitated. There is one thing you should know. Whitmore Holdings is one of the summit sponsors. Adrian Whitmore will also appear as a guest on the International Investment Panel. My fingers paused for a moment before continuing to turn the page. Understood. Mark studied me. If that creates a problem, I can dash it doesn't. I placed the documents in my bag and smiled. Work is work. After leaving Meridian, I went to a department store instead of returning to the villa. I hadn't shopped properly in 3 years. The brightness of the displays and the music from the ceiling speakers felt strangely overwhelming. I bought a pair of supportive flats for long hours in the booth and several soft, tailored business outfits. I paid with the project bonus I had earned. When the cashier handed me the receipt, I stared at the total for several seconds. I wasn't regretting the money, I was remembering what it felt like to spend money I had earned myself. Before my marriage, I rarely checked prices because I worked and paid my own bills. Every dollar I spent felt honest and uncomplicated. After marrying Adrian, I spent 3 years living like a dependent, even though I never asked him for money. The feeling of existing in someone else's house on someone else's terms had remained under my skin like a splinter. Now I had pulled it out myself. It was after 9 when I reached the villa. As I changed shoes in the foyer, I heard several voices in the living room. Margaret sat on the sofa with 4 wealthy friends dressed in jewelry and designer clothes. An elaborate English tea service covered the coffee table, though it was far too late for afternoon tea. Claire is home, Margaret called. Come sit with us. These ladies have been wanting to meet you. I placed my shopping bags beside the staircase and took the farthest seat on the sofa. The women examined me openly, their expressions combining curiosity and judgment. So this is Adrian's wife? Asked a woman wearing large emerald earrings. Her gaze traveled over me. She looks very well-behaved. What good is well-behaved? Another woman said. Her hair was arranged in glossy curls. She spoke just loudly enough for everyone to hear. Margaret, the marriage was so rushed. Arthur made one request and suddenly Adrian was married. You didn't even hold a proper society wedding. People must have talked. Margaret lifted her porcelain cup and blew across the tea without answering. I heard her family owned a small local business, the woman continued. Both parents are gone, aren't they? I suppose there wasn't much of a dowry. Enough, Margaret said. She placed her cup on the saucer with a sharp click. You're here for tea, not an investigation. The women fell quiet, but their interest and contempt remained obvious. I sat with my back straight and my face expressionless. I had endured scenes like this many times. Whenever Margaret invited her social circle to the house, I became an object in a display case, available for inspection and criticism. The woman with the emerald earrings abruptly changed the subject. Margaret, what about the woman I mentioned before? Vanessa Lane. You've met her, haven't you? Cambridge graduate, excellent family, her father is in commercial real estate. I've met her, Margaret said. For the first time that evening, a genuine smile touched her mouth. She's impressive. Intelligent, polished, and she and Adrian have a great deal to discuss. My fingers curled lightly against my knee. So she and Adrian. The woman with curled hair leaned closer, lowering her voice but not enough to hide the words. Do you think it may become serious? Margaret didn't answer directly. She raised her teacup and took another sip, her smile deepening. The expression said more than words could have. I stood. Margaret, I have an early morning. I'm going upstairs. Wait. The warmth vanished from her voice. I hear you've been accepting a great deal of outside interpreting work. I have. Did you decide that everything I told you was optional? She leaned back and examined me with the cool authority of a woman accustomed to obedience. A Whitmore daughter-in-law putting herself on display as hired help is humiliating enough. Are you determined to make the family look worse? Her friends watched me as if a spotlight had turned in my direction. Professional interpreting is not humiliating, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was steady. The room went still. The women exchanged glances. Their faces suggested that a woman from my background had just confirmed every suspicion they held about my manners. Margaret's expression hardened. You think you're extraordinary because you know a few languages? There are many talented women in the world, Claire. Talent doesn't make all of them worthy of the Whitmore name. She rose and stopped directly in front of me. I could smell her expensive perfume. If Arthur hadn't forced Adrian to marry you, do you honestly believe you would ever have entered this family? I've been more patient than you deserve. If you have any sense at all, you will stay home, behave yourself, and stop embarrassing us. I looked into her eyes. There was no affection there, only contempt delivered from a great height. 3 years of restraint rose from somewhere deep inside my chest, hot and unstoppable. I'm not embarrassed by my work, I said. My voice began to tremble, not from fear, but from emotion suppressed too long. The embarrassing thing is what the Whitmore family has done. Margaret's eyes widened. What did you say? Your family asked me to enter this marriage. I didn't beg for a place in your house. Arthur Whitmore owed my grandfather his life, and both families used my marriage to settle that debt. My father died believing I was honoring a promise. But I, Claire Bennett, do not personally owe the Whitmores anything. Silence filled the high-ceilinged room. Then Margaret slapped me. The sound cracked through the room like something breaking. My head turned to the side. A hot, violent pain spread across my left cheek, and my ear rang. One of the women inhaled sharply. Another stared with open excitement, as though the evening had finally become entertaining. That is for your dead father, Margaret said, her voice shaking with fury. Someone should have taught you respect. A woman with no upbringing has no right to call herself Adrian's wife. Slowly, I turned my face back toward her. Strangely, after the slap, I stopped trembling. The heat inside me settled into something cold and solid. I pressed my tongue against the inside of my numb cheek and tasted blood. Are you finished? I asked. Margaret stared at me. If you're finished, I'm going upstairs. I walked past her without hurrying. I'm the lead interpreter at tomorrow's summit. Your slap does not change that. Claire Bennett, come back here, she shouted behind me. I didn't stop. At the foot of the stairs, I nearly collided with Adrian, who had just entered the house. He wore a dark overcoat and still held his car keys. His eyes landed on the swelling across my cheek, and his expression changed instantly. Who hit you? I didn't answer. I walked around him and continued upstairs. Behind me, Margaret's sharp tone changed into injured outrage. Adrian, thank God you're home. I can't control your wife anymore. The rest disappeared around the turn of the staircase. Inside my room, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. 4 distinct finger marks stretched from my cheekbone toward my jaw. Tiny blood vessels had broken under the skin. By morning, the area would probably be purple. The summit began the next day. I couldn't appear in an interpreting booth with my face looking like this. I soaked a towel in cold water and pressed it against my cheek. The cold reduced the burning slightly. Someone knocked. Claire. Adrian. I didn't open the door. I'm coming in. The handle moved. Then I heard him searching for a key. I had forgotten to lock the door, or perhaps I had never formed the habit. During our entire marriage, Adrian had never come to this room unless there was a practical reason. The door opened. He stood in the doorway holding an ice pack wrapped in clean gauze. When he looked at my face, his jaw tightened. My mother hit you. It wasn't a question. I removed the wet towel and accepted the ice pack. The gauze kept the plastic from touching my skin directly. It was a small, thoughtful detail. For an instant, something in my heart moved, then exhaustion covered it. You don't need to apologize for her, I said. Adrian remained near the doorway. His eyes shifted to the papers spread across my bed, summit schedules, delegate biographies, and terminology charts covered in notes. You accepted the summit assignment. Yes. You knew I would attend. Yes. He looked back at me. Too many emotions moved behind his eyes, like sediment stirred through dark water. Claire, what are you trying to prove? I lowered the ice pack and studied my husband beneath the bathroom light. For the first time in 3 years, I looked at him carefully. He was an extraordinarily handsome man, straight nose, dark eyes, sharply defined mouth, the kind of face people remembered after a single meeting. But in 3 years, I had never seen love on that face. At least, never directed at me. I don't need to prove anything to you, I said. I only want to become myself again. And becoming yourself requires divorcing me? Adrian. I said his name with the weariness accumulated through 3 years of marriage. Ask yourself one honest question. Have you ever loved me? He didn't answer. His silence was the clearest answer he could give. You don't love me. You needed a wife to satisfy your grandfather's final wish. I didn't love you either. I married you to fulfill my father's request. Our marriage began as a transaction. I placed the ice pack on the nightstand and turned fully toward him. The promise has been honored. The debt has been repaid. Why should we remain tied to each other? His throat moved. For one moment, I thought he might finally say something that mattered. Instead, he turned toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped with his back to me. Tomorrow, he said, I'll be sitting in the front row. The door closed behind him. His footsteps faded down the hall. I stood alone, feeling the burning in my cheek gradually soften. The ice pack melted on the nightstand, leaving a small pool of water. I picked up my phone and sent Daniel a message. Revise the filing strategy. If Adrian refuses to sign a settlement, file a contested no-fault petition and proceed after the statutory waiting period. I won't wait for his permission. This time, I didn't hesitate. For more exciting content, please subscribe and follow us.